February 19th, 2025, and I'm sitting here in the office of the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, interviewing Professor Alex Vitale, who is a professor in the Sociology department at Brooklyn College. Aside from telling you what department he is in, I'm interested, Alex, in learning about your initial work on policing, how you got started with this project, and where it has led you.
And I'm also an affiliated faculty member in the Africana Studies department, where I'm teaching a course right now on blacks in the criminal justice system. So I started working on police issues quite, in a way, accidentally. I was working in the early 90s at the San Francisco Coalition on Homelessness as a policy advocate. And it was during that period that we saw the first kind of uptick of turning the issue of mass homelessness over to the police to manage, kind of giving up on any real solutions to the problem. And this was the period where we saw the rise of the broken windows theory and a whole kind of revanchist politics that blamed unhoused people for their own condition, defined them as a source of crime and disorder to be managed by policing, instead of people who had experienced a failure of housing and labor markets and government services. And so it was that led me to think more deeply about the role of police in the management of so-called urban problems, urban social problems, because I had been an urbanist as an undergraduate. Then after doing that for several years, I came to New York to go to graduate school in 1993, right as Rudolph Giuliani was elected mayor, and began to undertake the similar kinds of criminalization projects targeting these most vulnerable populations.
So did this assignment of unhoused people to the police begin in San Francisco?
So before it was really rolled out by Giuliani in New York, it was well underway in San Francisco. And San Francisco actually elected a conservative police chief to be mayor on a platform of driving homeless people out of public space. That was 40 years ago, and the problem still persists in San Francisco because they continue to try to throw police at a problem that can really only be solved by reorganizing housing and labor markets.
And it exists here in New York City to this day.
We have record levels of unhoused people at the moment, and the city has no real plan for housing them, and increasingly continues to just turn the problem over to police to manage.
How did this affect the project that you began as a PhD student? And I assume you did your PhD work in New York?
Yeah, so I went to school at the CUNY Graduate Center, and I ended up writing a dissertation about the rise of Giuliani and the kind of quality of life politics that he articulated. And I went into New York City neighborhoods, including East New York here in Brooklyn, and talked to people and went to community meetings to try to understand the appeal of this very kind of conservative political outlook. And I argued in my first book, City of Disorder, that there were some profound failures by the Democratic establishment here in New York that failed to really address the root causes of the kind of social disorders that Giuliani weaponized in his rise to power.
I assume that you introduced courses at Brooklyn College that were based on this work. Can you tell me about those?
Well, I teach a doctoral seminar that goes into some of this material at length. At the undergraduate level, I've had a number of different courses over the years, senior seminars, research courses, criminology courses, many of which have involved field work where we've gone out and looked at social disorder, we've attended police community meetings, we've talked to community leaders and police leaders about how they understand the public safety issues, especially in high crime communities like East New York, East Flatbush, and even here in the 70th precinct that includes Brooklyn College.
So you are both, in a sense, ethnographers and participants, would you say?
Yes, I think we try to be direct observers when we can, and also I bring people into the classroom when I can, so that the ideas that we're discussing in class don't remain an abstraction, but are rooted in students' real experiences. Last semester in my criminology class, I had students develop as a team a survey instrument and then go out and administer that instrument among family, friends, community members about public safety issues in New York. And then for their final project, they had to analyze those results, including producing cross-tabulation tables and trying to then interpret them.
You have a new project. I know a little bit about it, but can you tell us both its ideology, how it began, and what it's developed into?
Well, it's not so new. We've had the Policing and Social Justice Project for about 8 years now. Mm-hmm. It started because there was an uptick in the use of police to suppress so-called gang activity. In the period around 2016 and 2017, we saw a big expansion in so-called gang suppression takedowns, where large numbers of young people were arrested on conspiracy charges, so that there might have been a homicide, people were already in prison for that homicide, but the police department used social media connections and other kinds of networking connections to try to draw in the young people from that community into a further criminal case, often in cooperation with federal prosecutors. Sometimes 80, 100, 125 young people from a single neighborhood or public housing development would be indicted in these cases. And we received funding to try to understand better what was going on, to assemble a coalition of experts, of legal advocates, of community activists, to try to figure out what a better policy would be for managing violence problems in these communities. We've issued reports, we've helped to organize city council hearings, and right now we're part of an effort that has produced a bill that's before the city council that would eliminate the NYPD's ability to use gang databases to criminalize young people in the absence of any actual criminal charges.
Is this group with which you work, and I assume started, in relation to Brooklyn College students as well as others? Tell me about their involvement.
Yeah, so we have, first of all, I brought people into the college to give talks, to do Know Your Rights trainings, to inform young people about the nature of the gang database and the ways in which they might end up on it, to give young people the opportunity to file Freedom of Information requests to ask whether or not they are on the database. And we have had students involved in writing reports, producing videos, attending city council hearings, etc.
So you are not only investigators, but advocates.
Yeah, I consider the Policing and Social Justice Project to be a public policy center more than a pure research center. We are looking at best practices, we're analyzing existing policies, we're working with communities to try to assess what would be the best strategy to address the concerns that they have in their local communities, whether it's dealing with things like school safety, youth violence, mental health crisis response, etc.
I know in Chicago there have been alternative strategies of the police actually working with street gangs to minimize the conflicts between them Is there anything like that going on in New York, and have you been involved in any way with those sorts of strategies?
So most of the initiatives that involve the police working with youth gangs have a very punitive quality to them. It involves threatening letters, calling young people into meetings and threatening them. It involves higher levels of charges and increased surveillance. And so that's not the kind of initiative that we support. What we do is we work with community-based organizations that work directly with young people in the community to try to reduce the violence. So we're active right now, for instance, in Newark, New Jersey, that has what I think is the most developed community-centered anti-violence initiative in the country. It involves a whole ecosystem of community-based groups that are directly intervening in the lives of young people. They're doing mediations, they're involving people in trauma counseling, they're providing mental health services, they're doing substance misuse work. And violent crime in Newark is at a 60-year low in a way that's really out of step with the rest of the country.
And how do you think this has happened, this decrease that many people don't experience as a decrease has begun to happen?
Well, you're right to point out the disconnect between people's perceptions about the level of crime and the actual level of crime. You know, the governor and the mayor are pouring tens of millions of dollars into more subway policing at a time when subway policing is dropping. It's at historic lows, and subways are actually much safer than the city streets.
You mean subway crime, I think.
Yeah.
Subway crime.
What did I say?
Subway policing.
Well, at a time when crime on the subways is at historic lows,
Yeah.
and where crime on the subways is much lower than it is on the city's streets. So how are we seeing, this disconnect, I think, has to do with the ways in which both the media and politicians capitalize on fear of crime to sell newspapers, to sell ad revenue, and to get elected to office. And so we're caught in a kind of cynical trap where people are being fed constant crime narratives, even as crime is at historic lows.
You mentioned Newark, and I was going to ask you if you are involved with groups like yours across the country.
So there are a network of folks, some based at universities, some funded by progressive foundations who are involved in this work. So we're in constant communication with folks both in the US and internationally. For instance, we have a project in South America where we're working with partners on 4 continents trying to rethink international drug policy. Your
I think most recent work that comes out of the social justice work is your work with sex workers. And I'd like you to tell me about the actual interventions, the work you're doing with that community, who is in that community, what their lives are like, and also about the work that you've done to create a film about this experience.
So I have a long history of working on this issue, going back to the 90s when I was working at the San Francisco Coalition on Homelessness. Some of the young people who were unhoused, who we would do outreach with and organizing with, were involved in sex work. And so I learned through them about the kinds of circumstances that led them into engaging in sex work, the role that sex work played in their lives, and the very damaging role that policing and prohibitionist policies played. And so I had a connection with sex work advocacy organizations over many years and wrote about this issue in my book, The End of Policing. And about 4 years ago, the filmmaker Tammy Gold, who is on the faculty at Hunter College, approached me about trying to adapt parts of my book into a documentary. And we decided to focus on the sex work issue. And at the time, there was some active organizing underway here in New York State to try to roll back some of the laws that criminalize sex work. And my existing relationships, my track record writing about this issue in a particular way, meant that we were able to find partners who were willing to cooperate with us and help us get access to active sex workers to talk about their own lives and experiences and what they wanted to see in terms of public policy around this issue. So we've produced a 1-hour documentary called Sex Work, It's Just a Job, and we're beginning to submit it to festivals and to arrange screenings.
That's wonderful. Are the participants male, female, trans?
Yes.
Who are they?
All of the above, black, white, work in different parts of the sex work industry. As far as I can tell, it's the most diverse collection of sex workers speaking about their own experiences that's ever been collected on film.
I'm interested in the issue of victimization or not victimization. I have a feeling that there will be, I haven't seen the film, I've seen the trailer, but that there will be those in the field who do not see the field as exploitative.
So, sex work is, of course, a real hot button issue. There are deep divides in terms of the public policy. There are some feminists, for instance, who embrace prohibitionist policies, who imagine that we can use government intervention, mostly in the form of policing, to somehow prohibit or end sex work in ways that often involve further endangering and degrading the lives of actual sex workers. And so there's also a huge discourse around trafficking, which involves the coercion of people into sex work. And of course, we want to raise objections to any kind of coercive behavior. We want to provide services and outreach to try to reduce people's vulnerability to that kind of coercion. But our traditional prohibitionist model of policing either sex workers or clients fails to reduce that vulnerability. And so our position, and the position of the people that we interviewed over several years, was that what they wanted was a form of decriminalization. That this would give them greater ability to protect themselves, because it would bring